The stars burned cold and distant as the largest war fleet in known history gathered at the edge of human space. Over 2,000 warships floated in the darkness, their metal hulls reflecting the light of distant suns. The fleet belonged to the Korthax Dominion, a powerful alliance of 12 alien species that had ruled this region of the galaxy for 300 years. Admiral Veshkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Triumph. His 4 eyes scanned the tactical displays that showed every ship in his massive fleet. The admiral's scaled skin was dark blue, marked with the silver patterns that showed his high rank. He had commanded fleets for 40 years and had never lost a battle. Today would be no different. The Dominion had sent him here with a simple mission. Humanity, a young species that had only reached the stars 200 years ago, had refused to pay tribute to the Dominion. They had rejected the treaties. They had said no to the alliance that every wise species eventually joined. The Dominion Council had decided to teach these humans a lesson that the entire galaxy would remember. Veshkar pulled up the intelligence reports on human military strength. The numbers made him feel almost sorry for them. Humanity had perhaps 200 warships scattered across their 30 colony worlds. Their technology was adequate for fighting pirates and defending against small threats, but against the Dominion fleet, they had no chance. It would not even be a real battle. It would be an execution. The communication officer turned toward the admiral. "Sir, the ultimatum period ends in 2 hours. We have received no response from the human government." Veshkar nodded slowly. He had broadcast his message 3 days ago. The humans had 3 solar rotations to surrender. They would become a protected species under Dominion law. They would pay tribute, yes, but they would live. The alternative was the complete destruction of their military and the occupation of their worlds. It was not a difficult choice, yet the humans had remained silent. "They are probably arguing among themselves," said Commander Ralph, Veshkar's second-in-command. Young species often struggle to accept reality. They still think they are special. Other officers on the bridge made clicking sounds that passed for laughter among the Korthax. Veshkar did not join them. He had read the human history files carefully. These creatures were strange. They had fought terrible wars among themselves for thousands of years. Their homeworld had nearly destroyed itself multiple times, yet they had survived and reached the stars. They were resilient, he would give them that, but resilience meant nothing against superior force. The tactical officer spoke up. "Admiral, we are detecting a ship emerging from faster-than-light travel at the designated meeting point." Every eye on the bridge turned to the main display. A single ship appeared on the sensors, exactly where the ultimatum had told the humans to send their surrender delegation. The ship was large for a human vessel, perhaps a heavy cruiser based on its size. It sat alone in the empty space between the Dominion fleet and human territory. "One ship," Ralph said, his voice filled with confusion. "They sent one ship?" Veshkar leaned forward in his command chair. His tactical mind raced through possibilities. Was this a messenger ship coming to negotiate terms? Perhaps a sacrifice, one ship sent to die bravely so humanity could say they fought back? Or maybe a trick. A ship loaded with explosives meant to damage a few Dominion vessels before the real battle began. "Scan that ship," Veshkar ordered. "Full spectrum analysis. I want to know everything about it." The science officers bent over their instruments. Across the Dominion fleet, hundreds of captains were surely asking the same questions. The communication channels buzzed with chatter as commanders speculated about human intentions. Minutes passed. The human ship did not move. It simply waited there, as if it had all the time in the universe. "Scan complete, Admiral," the lead science officer reported. "The vessel appears to be a human-heavy cruiser. Length approximately 800 meters. Mass within normal parameters for a ship that size. We detect standard fusion reactors, conventional shield generators, and what appear to be magnetic acceleration weapons. No unusual energy signatures, no obvious superweapons or exotic technology." Ralph made a dismissive gesture with his upper arms. "Just a regular cruiser. Perhaps they truly have given up and sent this ship to discuss surrender terms." "Hail them," Veshkar commanded. The communication officer worked his console, and moments later, the main screen shifted to show the interior of the human ship's bridge. A human female sat in the command chair, wearing a dark blue uniform with insignia that marked her as a captain. Her skin was brown, her hair black and pulled back in a tight style. Her eyes were calm, showing no fear at all. I am Admiral Veshikar of the Korthax Dominion, he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. You are in violation of Dominion space. Identify yourself and state your intentions. The human woman smiled slightly. I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Star Collective ship Indomitable. I'm here as the commanding officer of humanity's response to your ultimatum. Where is the rest of your delegation? Veshikar asked. Where are your ambassadors, your politicians, your military leaders? I am the military response admiral, Chen replied. This ship is humanity's answer to your threat. Silence filled the bridge of the eternal triumph. Veshikar felt confusion turning to irritation. You mock the Dominion with a single ship? Not at all, Chen said, her voice perfectly calm. We simply determined that one ship would be sufficient for this situation. Now Ralph stepped forward, his anger clear. Sufficient? Human. Do you understand what you face? We have over 2,000 warships. Your entire species has barely 200. You send one cruiser against a fleet that could turn your worlds to ash and you claim it is sufficient? Captain Chen's expression did not change. Yes, Commander. That's exactly what I'm saying. The bridge erupted in angry voices. Officers demanded permission to destroy the arrogant human ship immediately. Some laughed, thinking this was some kind of human joke they did not understand. Others felt insulted that the humans would treat the mighty Dominion with such disrespect. Veshikar raised one hand and silence returned. His mind worked through the puzzle. Humans were not stupid. Their intelligence files showed them to be cautious in military matters, perhaps even too cautious. They planned carefully. They studied their enemies. Why would they send a single ship unless they truly believed it could accomplish something? A cold feeling touched the admiral's hearts. Captain Chen, he said slowly, what makes you believe your ship can stand against my fleet? We didn't come here to stand against your fleet, Admiral, Chen replied. We came here to give you one chance to avoid a terrible mistake. Turn your fleet around, go home. Forget about humanity and our territory. If you do this, we'll forget this ever happened. No one needs to die today. And if we refuse? Veshikar asked, though he already knew his answer. The entire Dominion was watching this encounter. He could not retreat from one ship without destroying his reputation and his career. Captain Chen's smile faded. Her eyes grew hard. Then we'll be forced to demonstrate why humanity doesn't need a large fleet, Admiral. We'll show you what we've been building while you were counting ships and measuring gun barrels. The communication ended. The human ship remained where it was, waiting alone in the darkness, surrounded by thousands of enemies. Veshikar stared at the tactical display. Every instinct told him something was wrong, but pride and duty left him no choice. He would advance. He would crush this single ship, and then humanity would learn the price of defiance. Admiral Veshikar paced across his bridge, his clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. The human ship still floated there, motionless and waiting. 20 minutes had passed since Captain Chen had cut communications. 20 minutes of silence that felt heavier than it should. Admiral, Commander Ralph said, breaking into his thoughts, we cannot simply wait here. The entire Dominion is watching this confrontation. Every species in the sector has their sensors pointed at us. If we do nothing, we will look weak. Veshikar knew his second officer was right. News of this encounter was already spreading through the galaxy's communication networks. Merchants, diplomats, and spies were all reporting what they saw. The mighty Dominion fleet held at bay by a single human ship. Every species that the Dominion had conquered or intimidated was watching to see what would happen next. What are the humans doing? Veshikar asked the tactical officer. Any changes in their status? No, sir. The ship maintains position. Shields are at standard levels. Weapons are not charging. They are simply waiting. This was wrong. Everything about this situation felt wrong. Veshikar had fought many battles against many species. He knew the signs of fear, of desperation, of bluffing. But this human captain showed none of those signs. She acted like someone holding all the advantages, not someone facing impossible odds. Science section, Veshikar called out. Run the scans again. Deeper this time. I want to know if they are hiding something. The science officers worked in silence for several minutes. Veshikar watched the data stream across his displays. The human ship was definitely real. It was definitely alone. The power readings were consistent with a normal cruiser. There were no cloaked ships hiding nearby. No massive weapon systems disguised as something else. Just one ship. Admiral, the scans show nothing unusual, the lead science officer reported. The ship is exactly what it appears to be. A heavy cruiser with conventional technology. Then why? Routh demanded. Why send it alone? What possible strategy could this serve? A junior officer spoke up hesitantly. Perhaps it is a cultural thing. Maybe human honor requires them to face us even when they cannot win. Or perhaps they are insane, another officer suggested. The psychological profiles noted that humans sometimes make irrational decisions based on emotion. Veshkar considered both ideas and rejected them. He had studied humanity carefully. They valued their people. They mourned their dead. They wrote elaborate laws to protect even a single life. They would not waste a ship and its crew on a meaningless gesture, unless they did not believe it was meaningless. Communications, Veshkar said. Open a channel to the human ship again. Captain Chen's face appeared on the screen almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for his call. She looked completely relaxed, as if she were discussing something trivial, instead of facing a fleet that could destroy her in seconds. Admiral, she greeted him. Have you made your decision? I have questions first, Veshkar replied. You are clearly an intelligent being, Captain. You must understand that your ship cannot defeat my fleet. So I ask you honestly, what is your purpose here? Are you buying time for your colonies to evacuate? Are you hoping to negotiate while appearing strong? Chen shook her head slowly. No evacuation, Admiral. Our colonies are continuing their normal operations. As for negotiation, I already gave you our terms. Leave and everyone lives. Stay and we demonstrate our capabilities. Capabilities? Veshkar repeated the word carefully. Captain, our scans show your ship has no special weapons. No super technology. You are one cruiser against 2,000 warships. What capabilities could possibly matter? The human captain leaned back in her chair. Tell me, Admiral, when was the last time the Dominion faced a serious military challenge? The question surprised Veshkar. We fought the Tresh Rebellion 18 years ago. And before that? The Sector Wars 43 years ago. So 60 years of mostly peaceful expansion, Chen said thoughtfully. You've been so powerful for so long that most species surrender without fighting. And when they do fight, you simply overwhelm them with numbers and firepower, standard tactics, standard weapons, everything by the book. That is the nature of power, Veshkar replied. We are strong because we have more ships, better coordination, and superior resources. This is not a secret, Captain. This is simply reality. It was reality, Chen corrected. But reality changes, Admiral. While the Dominion was building fleets and conquering planets, humanity was fighting a different kind of war. We were at war with physics itself, Rolf snorted. Meaningless words. Philosophy will not save you from plasma fire. Chen's eyes shifted to the Korthax commander. You're right that philosophy won't save us. But applied science will. You see, humanity learned something important from our history. We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest or the toughest. But we're very, very good at solving problems in new ways. She stood up from her chair and walked closer to the screen. For the past 80 years, humanity has been working on a single question. How do you fight when you're outnumbered? How do you survive when the enemy has more guns and more ships? The answer isn't to build more of the same. The answer is to change the rules of the game entirely. Veshkar felt his spine ridges tighten, a biological response to threat. What have you built, Captain? That's the question, isn't it? Chen smiled again, but this time there was something dangerous in that expression. The Indomitable represents 3 generations of human scientific achievement. Every breakthrough we've made in quantum mechanics, field theory, spatial manipulation, and systems integration went into this ship. We didn't build a bigger gun, Admiral. We built something that makes your guns irrelevant. Impossible, Rolf declared. Our intelligence has monitored human research. You have made no significant breakthroughs in weapons technology. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. We haven't made breakthroughs in weapons technology. We made breakthroughs in fundamental physics. There's a difference. Veshkar's tactical mind raced through the implications. If the humans were telling the truth, if they had developed something genuinely new, then the Dominion's standard tactics might not work. But that was a big if. More likely, this was a bluff, an attempt to make the Dominion hesitate and doubt. Prove it, Veshkar said suddenly. Prove you have this miracle technology you claim. Demonstrate your capabilities before we engage. Chen shook her head. I can't do that, Admiral. If I demonstrate our technology now, you'll just study it and adapt. You'll retreat, analyze what you've seen, and return with countermeasures. The only way this works is if you commit to your attack and learn the hard way. Then we are at an impasse, Veshkar said. I cannot retreat based on threats alone. You refuse to demonstrate your capabilities. Logic dictates that I must assume you are bluffing. Logic dictates many things, Chen replied quietly. But logic also says that a species doesn't send a single ship against a massive fleet unless they have a very good reason. Logic says that confidence without apparent cause usually means hidden strength, and logic definitely says that underestimating your enemy is the fastest way to lose a war. She stepped back to her command chair. I'll make this simple, Admiral. You have 3 options. 1, you turn your fleet around and leave. No one loses face because you can say you chose mercy over slaughter. 2, you send a small force to test us and they'll learn what we can do. 3, you attack with everything at once and you'll still learn what we can do, but more painfully. I choose option 4, Veshkar said coldly. I destroy your ship, occupy your worlds, and teach the galaxy that threats mean nothing without power to back them up. Then I'm sorry it came to this, Captain Chen said, and she actually sounded sincere. I genuinely hoped you would be wiser. For what it's worth, Admiral, your crew will survive what comes next. We don't want to kill anyone. We just want to make our point very, very clear. The communication ended again. Veshkar turned to his officers. Deploy destroyer squadrons 3, 7, and 9. 36 ships total. They will close with the human vessel and disable it with minimal damage. I want that ship captured and its captain brought before the Dominion Council. And if she truly has some new weapon? Rolth asked quietly. Then 36 ships will learn what it is, Veshkar answered. And we will adapt accordingly. But I do not believe she has anything that can threaten a full Dominion fleet. Proceed with the attack. Orders flowed through the fleet. 36 destroyers moved forward in perfect formation, their weapons charging, their shields bright. The single human ship waited for them, alone in the darkness, facing impossible odds with impossible confidence. The 36 destroyers of the Korthax Dominion moved through space like a school of predatory fish. Each ship was 300 meters long, bristling with weapons and protected by shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. Their captains were experienced officers who had fought pirates, rebels, and various other threats. They moved in a textbook formation that maximized their firepower, while minimizing their vulnerability. Admiral Veshkar watched from his flagship as the destroyers closed the distance to the human ship. The tactical display showed perfect coordination. Every ship knew its role. Every weapon system was ready. This was the Dominion way, refined over centuries of warfare. The destroyers are entering optimal weapons range, the tactical officer reported. They will open fire in 30 seconds. Veshkar leaned forward in his chair. This was the moment of truth. Either the human captain was bluffing, and her ship would be disabled in the opening salvo, or she actually had something new. Part of him almost hoped for the second option. War had become boring when every enemy simply surrendered or died quickly. A real challenge would be interesting. On the display, the human ship finally moved. But it did not turn to run or maneuver defensively. Instead, the Indomitable accelerated directly toward the attacking formation. It was the opposite of what any rational commander would do when outnumbered. The human ship is charging our destroyers, Rolth said with disbelief. They are actually attacking. All ships open fire, the destroyer squadron commander ordered over the tactical channel. Space lit up with weapons fire. Plasma bolts, magnetic accelerator rounds, and missile salvos all converged on the human ship from multiple angles, hundreds of shots, all perfectly aimed by computers that could track a target down to the centimeter. It was enough firepower to destroy a ship 10 times the Indomitable's size. Every single shot missed. Veshkar's spine ridges shot straight up in shock. On the tactical display, he could see the weapons fire passing through the space where the human ship should be. But the ship was not there. Except it was there. The sensors showed it clearly, but the weapons could not hit it. What just happened? Ralph demanded. Our targeting computers are the best in the galaxy. How did we miss at optimal range? The lead science officer frantically checked his instruments. Admiral, the human ship is generating some kind of field. It is interfering with our targeting systems. No, wait, it is more than that. The ship appears to be in multiple positions simultaneously. Our sensors show it at specific coordinates, but when our weapons reach those coordinates, the ship is somewhere slightly different. That's impossible, the tactical officer said. Matter cannot exist in multiple places at once. Quantum mechanics says it can, the science officer replied. At the subatomic level, particles exist in probability clouds rather than fixed positions. But scaling that up to a ship-sized object should be impossible. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. Veshkar ignored the technical discussion and focused on what mattered. Can our ships adapt their targeting? They are trying, Admiral, but the human ship is not predictable. It is not simply jamming our systems. It is fundamentally changing how targeting works against it. On the display, the Indomitable reached the destroyer formation. It did not fire any visible weapons. Instead, something pulsed outward from the human ship. A wave of energy that was barely visible on the sensors. The wave passed through 12 of the destroyers in an instant. Those 12 ships simply stopped moving. Their engines cut out. Their shields collapsed. Their weapons powered down. They continued forward on momentum alone, but they were clearly dead in space. Report, Veshkar snapped. What happened to those ships? The communication channels filled with confused voices from the affected destroyers. Their captains and crews were alive and unharmed. But every major system on their ships had shut down simultaneously. Emergency power systems were not responding. Backup generators would not start. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off 12 warships at the same time. The remaining 24 destroyers scattered in panic, breaking their perfect formation. Some fired wildly at the human ship. Others tried to retreat to a safe distance. A few brave captains attempted to ram the Indomitable, using their ships as weapons since their guns were useless. None of it worked. The human ship moved through the destroyer formation like it was dancing. It was never where the Korthax expected it to be. Every few seconds, another pulse of energy would reach out and touch another destroyer, and that ship would go dark and drift helplessly. In less than 5 minutes, all 36 destroyers were disabled. Not destroyed, not exploded, just turned off, with their crews alive inside metal coffins that would not obey any commands. The bridge of the Eternal Triumph was completely silent. Every officer stared at the tactical display in shock. The human ship sat calmly in the middle of the disabled destroyer squadron, completely undamaged, waiting. Admiral, the communication officer said quietly, Captain Chen is hailing us. Put her on screen, Veshkar ordered, his voice steady despite the cold fear growing in his hearts. Captain Chen appeared, still looking calm and professional. Behind her, Veshkar could see her crew working at their stations with practiced efficiency. Admiral, I want you to understand something important. Those 36 ships are intact. The crews are safe. In about an hour, their systems will begin rebooting and they will regain control. We could have destroyed them. We chose not to. What did you do to them? Veshkar asked. We used what we call cascade disruptors, Chen explained. They are not traditional weapons. They do not damage or destroy. They simply convince every electronic system in a targeted ship that it is time to shut down. The effect is temporary, but while it lasts, the ship is completely helpless. Ralph stepped forward. No weapon can do that. You would need to hack into each individual ship's computer systems, and our systems are protected by multiple layers of security. You are thinking about this wrong, Commander, Chen replied. We are not hacking your computers. We are manipulating the fundamental electromagnetic fields that all electronic systems depend on. Your computers, your power grids, your weapons, they all run on electrical current. We have learned how to generate fields that interfere with those currents on a quantum level. Your security systems cannot stop us because we are not actually attacking your systems. We are changing the physical laws they operate under, at least temporarily. Veshkar felt his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. If humanity had truly developed this technology, then everything the Dominion knew about warfare was outdated. Shields, armor, weapons, none of it mattered if an enemy could simply turn off your ship with a wave of energy. You are one ship, Veshkar said, trying to find some advantage. Even with this weapon, you cannot disable 2,000 ships before we destroy you. Are you certain about that, Admiral? Chen asked. You just sent 36 experienced captains and well-armed destroyers against me. They all failed to land a single hit. They all ended up disabled. What makes you think sending more ships will have a different result? Numbers, Rolf answered for his admiral. Eventually you will make a mistake or run out of power, and we have plenty of ships to sacrifice until that happens. Chen nodded slowly. You are not wrong, Commander. The Indomitable does have limits. If you attacked with your entire fleet at once, all 2,000 ships, you would eventually disable us through sheer overwhelming force. Of course, you would lose hundreds of ships in the process. maybe thousands. Your fleet would be crippled. And for what? To conquer a species that only wants to be left alone. She paused, letting her words sink in. I am giving you another chance, Admiral. You have seen what one human ship can do. You have seen that we do not want to kill your people. We disabled those destroyers instead of destroying them. But if you continue this attack, I cannot guarantee that everyone will survive. War has a way of escalating beyond anyone's control. Veshkar turned away from the screen and looked at his bridge officers. He saw doubt in their eyes. They had watched the destroyer squadron fail completely. They had seen tactics that should be impossible. Every officer on this bridge was now wondering if they would be the next ones drifting helplessly in space, trapped in a dead ship. But Veshkar was an admiral. He had not risen to his position by giving up when faced with a challenge. Captain Chen, I acknowledge that you have impressive technology, but the Dominion does not surrender to threats no matter how advanced. If you will not leave human space voluntarily, then we will force you out. I was afraid you would say that, Chen replied, and she genuinely looked sad. All ships power up to full combat status. Show the Admiral what the Indomitable can do when we stop being gentle. The human ship began to glow with energy. The sensors on the Eternal Triumph screamed warnings as power levels inside the Indomitable climbed to levels that should be impossible for a ship that size. Whatever the humans had built, it was about to show its full capabilities. Veshkar straightened in his command chair. All ships, battle formation Alpha. Prepare for fleet-wide assault. We will show these humans that technology means nothing against superior numbers and determination. 2,000 warships powered their weapons and shields. The largest fleet in Dominion history prepared to crush a single ship. And Deep-Dew Admiral Veshkar made his decision. Pride, duty, and political pressure all pointed in the same direction. The Dominion could not back down from a single human ship, no matter how impressive its technology seemed. If word spread that the mighty Dominion fleet had been turned away by one vessel, every conquered species would start questioning whether they needed to stay under Dominion rule. Communications. Send orders to all fleet commanders, Veshkar said. We will attack in 3 waves. First wave consists of 200 cruisers and destroyers. They will engage from multiple vectors simultaneously. Second wave will be our carriers and their fighter squadrons, 500 small craft total. Third wave will be our dreadnoughts and heavy cruisers, another 200 capital ships. The remaining vessels will stay in reserve. Rolth studied the tactical plan and nodded approval. A sound strategy, Admiral. The first wave will force the human ship to reveal the full extent of its capabilities and exhaust its exotic weapons. The fighters will overwhelm its defensive systems. The dreadnoughts will deliver the killing blow. Exactly, Veshkar agreed. No single ship, regardless of its technology, can withstand this level of coordinated assault. Captain Chen will learn that innovation cannot defeat proper military doctrine. The orders went out across the fleet. 200 ships moved into position, surrounding the Indomitable on all sides. They formed a sphere with the human ship at the center, positioned so their firing solutions would not risk hitting friendly vessels. It was a formation designed to trap fast-moving raiders. Against a single stationary target, it was absolute. All ships report ready, Admiral, the tactical officer announced. First wave, you are authorized to engage, Veshkar commanded. Disable if possible, destroy if necessary. 200 warships opened fire at the same moment. The vacuum of space filled with energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and guided missiles. It was a storm of destruction that converged on the Indomitable from every angle. No ship could dodge fire coming from all directions at once. No shield could withstand that much concentrated power. The human ship did not try to dodge. Instead, something changed around it. The sensors on the Eternal Triumph showed a massive distortion forming around the Indomitable, like space itself was bending and twisting. The distortion grew into a sphere that surrounded the human ship completely. The weapons fire reached the sphere and something impossible happened. The energy beams curved away as if repelled by an invisible force. The kinetic rounds changed direction in mid-flight, their trajectories bending around the sphere. The missiles spun in confused circles, their guidance systems unable to find a path to their target. Some of the deflected weapons fire curved back toward the attacking ships. Plasma bolts that were meant for the Indomitable instead struck the Korthax cruisers that had fired them. Missiles designed to destroy the human ship exploded against Dominion shields. The perfect sphere of attackers became chaos as ships scrambled to avoid their own weapons. What is that? Rolth shouted over the confusion on the bridge. What kind of shield can redirect incoming fire? The science officer worked frantically at his console. It is not a shield, Commander. The human ship is manipulating space-time itself. They have created a region of curved space where the normal rules of physics are altered. Weapons fire cannot reach them because the space between us and them is bent in a way that makes a straight line impossible. Beskar struggled to understand, but that would require the same level of power that moves a ship through faster-than-light travel. They would need a massive energy source. They apparently have one, Admiral, the science officer replied grimly. On the tactical display, the Indomitable stopped being simply defensive. The distortion sphere collapsed and the human ship began to move. But it was not normal movement. The ship seemed to skip from one position to another without crossing the space between. One moment it was at the center of the attacking formation. The next moment it was next to a Korthax cruiser. Then it was a kilometer away near a different ship. They are creating localized distortions in space-time, the science officer explained as he watched. They fold space, move through the fold, and unfold it. They are essentially teleporting short distances, and wherever the Indomitable appeared, it released pulses of the same energy that had disabled the destroyers. But this time the pulses were stronger and faster. Ships died by the dozens. Their lights went out. Their engines stopped. Their crews found themselves drifting in dead metal boxes, helpless and terrified. The Indomitable danced through the attacking formation like a ghost. It was never where the Korthax ships expected it to be. Their weapons could not track something that moved by folding space. Their tactics assumed an enemy that followed normal rules of physics. But the human ship played by different rules entirely. In 10 minutes, all 200 ships of the first wave were disabled. Not a single human weapon had been traditional. No missiles, no energy beams, no kinetic rounds. Just those pulses of energy that turned mighty warships into expensive debris, and the Indomitable remained completely undamaged. Beskar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. His best ships, his experienced crews, his perfect tactics, all meaningless against technology that rewrote the foundations of space combat. For the first time in his 40 years of command, he felt genuine fear. "Admiral, the fleet is requesting orders," the communication officer said nervously. "Should we proceed with the second wave?" Before Beskar could answer, Captain Chen's face appeared on the screen again. This time she was not calm. She looked tired and sad. "Admiral, please stop this," she said quietly. "You have lost 236 ships and not one person has died yet. We are keeping them alive because we do not want to be murderers. But if you send more ships, the energy requirements will increase. Systems will begin to fail in ways we cannot control. People will start dying not because we want to kill them, but because war is chaotic and unpredictable." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I know you cannot surrender without losing honor. I know the Dominion Council is watching. I know that retreating from one ship would make you look weak. So let me give you an alternative. Send your carrier wings. Send your fighter squadrons. Let them attack us with everything they have. When we disable them all without a single fighter landing a hit, you can tell the Council that you faced an enemy with technology beyond anything the Dominion has ever encountered. No one will question your decision to retreat then." Routh turned to Beskar. "It is a trap, Admiral. She wants us to commit our fighters where she can destroy them easily. Or she is telling the truth," Beskar said slowly, "and she is giving us a way to save face while demonstrating her superiority." He thought about the 200 disabled ships, the complete failure of standard tactics, the impossible technology that bent space and disabled ships with a touch. He thought about his crews, thousands upon thousands of soldiers who trusted him to lead them wisely. He thought about the consequences of pride versus the cost of continued fighting. "Deploy the carrier wing," Beskar ordered. "All fighters full assault pattern. If Captain Chen wants to demonstrate her superiority, we will give her that chance." 500 fighter craft launched from the Dominion carriers. They were small, fast, and heavily armed. Their pilots were among the best in the fleet, trained to exploit any weakness. They swarmed toward the Indomitable like angry insects, firing as they came. The human ship did not create its space-time distortion bubble this time. Instead, it began moving in ways that should not be possible. It accelerated and stopped instantly with no transition period. It changed direction at sharp angles without slowing down. The laws of inertia seemed not to apply to it, and as it moved, it released smaller pulses of its disruption energy. Fighters fell from the sky not in flames but in silence, their systems shutting down one by one. The pilots would survive in their suits until they could be rescued, but their craft were dead. The Indomitable moved through the fighter swarm like a dancer, never touched, never slowed, systematically disabling every single craft. The pilots tried everything, every trick they knew, every tactic they had learned. Nothing worked. In 15 minutes, 500 fighters floated dead in space, and the human ship remained perfect and undamaged. Captain Chen appeared on screen again. Her face was harder now, less sympathetic. That is 736 disabled ships, Admiral. 736 crews that will need rescue. 736 vessels that will need months of repair. And we are just one ship. Just one, she paused. I am going to open fire on your flagship now. Not to destroy it, not to kill you, but to prove a point. Your shields will not stop us. Your armor will not protect you. Your weapons will not save you. When you feel your ship systems begin to fail, remember that we could have killed everyone on board, but we chose not to. Remember that humanity offered you peace and you chose war. The communication cut off. Alarms screamed across the bridge of the Eternal Triumph as the Indomitable appeared just a few kilometers away. Far too close for such a large vessel to approach without being detected earlier. The human ship pulsed with energy. Veshkar felt his flagship shuddy. The bridge of the Eternal Triumph was dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in a dim red glow. Admiral Veshkar sat in his command chair, surrounded by dead consuls and silent officers. His flagship, the most powerful ship in the Dominion fleet, had been reduced to a floating metal box in less than 30 seconds. Around him, his crew worked frantically with manual tools trying to restore even basic systems, but every time they managed to get something online, it would shut down again moments later. The human ship had done something to the Eternal Triumph systems that went beyond simple damage. It had fundamentally broken the way their technology worked. Admiral, Rolth said quietly, using a handheld light to see his commander's face. We have confirmed that life support is stable. The emergency batteries are functioning. We are not in immediate danger, but we are also completely helpless. Veshkar nodded slowly. Through the viewport, he could see the Indomitable hanging in space like a predator watching its prey. It had not moved after disabling his flagship. It was simply waiting. The message was clear. Humanity could destroy them at any time. They were choosing not to. Communication status? Veshkar asked. We managed to restore short-range radio, a junior officer reported. We can talk to nearby ships, but not the entire fleet. Contact the other flagships. I need to know the status of the remaining fleet. Over the next hour, as crews worked to restore basic systems throughout the disabled ships, a picture emerged. 737 Dominion vessels were dead in space. That included Admiral Veshkar's flagship, 200 cruisers and destroyers, and more than 500 fighter craft. Every single one had been disabled without being destroyed. Every single crew had survived. The remaining ships of the fleet maintained their distance from the human vessel. No commander wanted to be the next victim of the Indomitable's impossible technology. They waited for orders that Veshkar could not send because his communication systems were not working. It took 3 hours before the Eternal Triumph's engineers managed to restore main communications. When they did, Veshkar immediately received dozens of urgent messages from his fleet commanders. Some wanted to continue the attack. Others argued for retreat. A few suggested using their most powerful weapons, the planet-killing missiles that were normally reserved for the most extreme situations. But all of them were afraid. Veshkar could hear it in their voices. The confidence that had filled the fleet just hours ago had been replaced by doubt and fear. They had all watched 700 ships be disabled by a single enemy vessel. They had all seen their best tactics fail completely, and they all knew that if they continued fighting, they would probably be next. Admiral, Captain Chen is hailing us again, the communication officer announced. Put her on screen, Veshkar ordered. Captain Chen looked different now. She seemed older, more tired. Admiral, I hope you have had time to think about your situation. 737 of your ships are disabled. Their crews are safe, but the ships themselves will take weeks or months to repair, and we did that in less than an hour. One ship against your entire fleet, she paused. I want you to understand something important. The Indomitable is not a superweapon. It is not something magical or impossible. It is simply the result of 3 generations of human scientists working on a single problem: how to survive when we are outnumbered. Every piece of technology on this ship is based on proven physics. Quantum mechanics, relativity, field theory. We just applied those principles in ways no one had thought of before. Why are you telling me this? Veshkar asked. Because I want you to understand that this is not the limit of what we can do, Chen replied. The Indomitable is the first ship of its kind. We have 6 more in construction. In 5 years, we will have 50. In 10 years, every human military vessel will have some version of this technology, and we will keep improving it, keep refining it, keep making it better. She leaned closer to the screen. But here is the important part, Admiral. We do not want to use these ships. We do not want to fight the Dominion or anyone else. We just want to be left alone. We want to explore the galaxy, meet new species, learn new things, and live in peace. The only reason we built the Indomitable was because species like the Dominion kept threatening us. Ralph, standing beside Veshkar's chair, spoke up. You say you want peace, but you have just humiliated the most powerful alliance in the sector. You have shown our weakness to the entire galaxy. Do you think we can simply forget that? I hope you can, Chen said simply. Because the alternative is much worse. If the Dominion continues to see humanity as an enemy, we will continue to develop better weapons. We will share our technology with other species who feel threatened by the Dominion. We will build alliances based on mutual defense against your aggression, and eventually, the Dominion will find itself surrounded by enemies who can all defend themselves. She sat back. Or you can accept that the galaxy has changed. You can recognize that humanity is not a target for conquest. You can send ambassadors instead of warships, and you can help us build a galaxy where power comes from cooperation instead of domination. Veshkar felt the weight of the decision before him. As a military commander, his instinct was to fight, to find a weakness in the human technology and exploit it, to bring overwhelming force and crush this upstart species before they became an even bigger threat. But as a leader responsible for thousands of lives, he had to face reality. The Indomitable had proven its superiority in every possible way. It could not be targeted. It could not be hit. It could disable ships faster than the Dominion could deploy them. And if the humans truly had more ships like this being built, then continued conflict would be suicide for the Dominion fleet. Captain Chen, Veshkar said slowly, choosing his words carefully. If I order my fleet to withdraw, what guarantees can you give me that humanity will not use this technology to threaten Dominion worlds? None, Chen answered honestly. You will have to trust us just as we are trusting you by not destroying your fleet when we had the chance. Trust has to start somewhere, Admiral. Let it start here. Veshkar looked at Rolth, at his bridge officers, at the tactical display showing his crippled fleet. Then he made his decision. Commander Rolth, send orders to all ships. We are withdrawing from human space. Disabled vessels will be towed to safe distance for repairs. The fleet will return to Dominion territory. Admiral, the Council will demand an explanation, Rolth warned. Then I will give them one, Veshkar replied. I will tell them that humanity possesses technology we cannot defeat with conventional tactics. I will tell them that continuing this war would cost thousands of lives and hundreds of ships. And I will recommend that the Dominion opens diplomatic relations with humanity immediately. He turned back to the screen.
Captain Chen, my fleet will withdraw.
But I have a question for you. Why did you really do this? You could have destroyed us. You could have killed thousands of Dominion soldiers and sent a much stronger message. Why choose mercy? Chen smiled slightly. Because humanity learned something from our own history, Admiral. We learned that enemies today can become friends tomorrow, but only if you leave them alive and give them reason to choose friendship. We learned that the strongest victory is not the one where you destroy your enemy, but the one where you convince them to stop being your enemy. She stood up. Your disabled ships will begin recovering in approximately 1 hour. Their systems will reboot automatically. We have sent repair instructions to your engineering teams. In 3 days you should be able to move under your own power. We will monitor from a distance to ensure you get home safely. You would help us? Veshkar asked, surprised. Of course, Chen replied. You are not our enemy, Admiral. You never were. You were just someone who did not understand that humanity had changed the rules. Now you understand. Now you can go home and help others understand too. The communication ended. Veshkar sat in his darkened bridge and watched the human ship on the viewport. It remained nearby, not threatening, just present. a silent guardian making sure the Dominion fleet could recover. Over the next 3 days, exactly as Captain Chen had promised, the disabled ships slowly recovered. Systems rebooted, engines came back online. The massive fleet that had come to conquer humanity instead began the long journey home, humbled and changed. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light. Every species heard the story of how humanity's single ship had defeated the Dominion's greatest fleet without killing a single soldier. Some species celebrated, others worried about this new power. But everyone understood that the galaxy had changed. 3 months later, Ambassador Chen, sister to Captain Sarah Chen, arrived at the Dominion Council chambers. She came not with threats but with offers of technology sharing, mutual defense treaties, and cultural exchange. The Council, still shocked by their fleet's defeat, agreed to formal diplomatic relations. 5 years later, the Dominion and humanity were not enemies anymore. They were not quite friends, but they were partners in keeping the peace in their region of space. Other species that had suffered under Dominion rule found their voices again, knowing that alternatives to submission existed. The council chamber aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion stretched wide enough to hold 1,000 warriors. But today only the most important ones filled its gleaming metal halls. Grand Admiral Thexnor stood at the center, his forearms crossed behind his back as holographic displays floated around him like captured stars. Each display showed a different world, a different conquest, a different species that had learned to kneel before the Zorkathi Empire. 300 years of perfect victories, 47 star systems, not a single defeat in living memory. Thexnor's scales gleamed purple under the chamber lights as he gestured toward the newest display. A small blue planet rotated slowly, white clouds swirling across its surface. Oceans covered most of it. The third planet from a yellow star the primitives called Sol. Earth, Thexnor said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute confidence. Our scouts have watched them for 6 of their years. They are children playing with fire. The other admirals leaned forward, studying the data streams flowing beside the planet image. One of them, a younger officer named Kexel, raised a claw hesitantly. They have achieved nuclear fission, Grand Admiral. Doesn't protocol suggest caution with nuclear-capable species? Thexnor's laugh rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. Several other officers joined him. The sound echoed off the walls, bouncing back with the certainty of warriors who had never known defeat. Nuclear fission, Thexnor repeated as if the words themselves were a joke. We mastered fusion reactors before their planet cooled from its formation. They still burn chemical fuels to escape their own gravity well. Their fastest ships would take 40,000 years to reach the nearest star. He zoomed the display closer, showing clusters of lights across the night side of the planet. Look at them. Divided into hundreds of territories. They call them nations. They fight each other over invisible lines drawn on maps. Another admiral spoke up, her voice filled with the same casual contempt. The report says they've had 2 global wars in the last century alone. They nearly destroyed themselves with their own primitive weapons. These are not warriors. They are savages who happen to have discovered atoms. Thexnor nodded slowly, letting the words settle over the council. This was the Empire's strength, this certainty, this absolute knowledge that they stood at the peak of civilization, while others crawled in the valleys below. The Emperor wants their water, Thexnor continued. The planet is 70% ocean, mostly clean, mostly accessible. The strategic position of their system gives us a foothold in this spiral arm. Projections show minimal resistance. 3 days for complete pacification, 7 days for full resource extraction infrastructure. The holographic display changed, showing the invasion fleet that waited in high orbit around the Zorkathi homeworld. 300 warships, each one capable of reducing a city to glass from orbit. 50,000 warriors, trained since birth in the art of conquest. Weapons that could crack a planet's crust if needed. Kexel studied the numbers with a frown. Forgive my question, Grand Admiral, but isn't this force excessive? 300 ships for a pre-FTL civilization? We took the Kelvan homeworld with 70 ships, and they had particle beam defense grids. The Emperor wishes to send a message, Thexnor replied. Not just to Earth, but to any other primitives watching the stars. Resistance is futile. Surrender is the only logical choice. We will arrive in overwhelming force, demonstrate our superiority, and they will beg to serve. The council murmured its approval. This was the Zorkathi way. Shock and awe. Absolute dominance. In 3 centuries, it had never failed. Prepare the fleet, Thexnor commanded. We jump to their system in 6 hours. Send the standard message when we arrive. They have 72 hours to surrender their governments, 70% of their water resources, and accept vassal status under imperial law. If they refuse, he paused, letting the silence stretch. We will demonstrate what happens to those who defy the Empire. The council saluted as one, forearms crossing over their chests in perfect synchronization. Within the hour, the fleet began its departure sequence. 300 warships vanished into the folded space of faster-than-light travel, heading toward a small blue planet that didn't yet know its fate had been decided. On Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her office at the Joint Deep Space Monitoring Facility in New Mexico, staring at data that shouldn't exist. She had been studying background radiation patterns in the Oort cloud when the readings went strange. Not wrong exactly, but unexpected. Gravitational distortions where there should be nothing but empty space and distant ice. She ran the analysis 3 times, checking her equipment, questioning her own eyes. The numbers didn't change. Something massive had just entered the outer edges of the solar system. Multiple massive somethings moving together in a formation that nature could never create. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone. This was the call that everyone in her field had talked about in quiet voices, the one they had hoped would never come, the one that meant humanity was no longer alone, and the visitors weren't stopping to say hello. "Sir," she said when the director answered, "we have multiple contacts. Entering from the direction of Alpha Centauri. Speed is 0.3 light speed and holding steady. Vector is direct approach to Earth, sir. They're not slowing down." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then the director's voice came back, steady but tight with controlled tension. "How many contacts?" Sarah looked at her screen, at the cluster of gravitational signatures that painted a picture no one wanted to see. "Preliminary count is 287 distinct masses, sir. Size classification suggests capital ships. This is a fleet. This is an invasion force. Lock down the facility. Emergency protocols. I'm calling Washington." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, staring at the screen as the contacts moved steadily inward, cutting across the solar system like a knife aimed at Earth's heart. Around her, alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed in hallways. The facility that had spent decades listening to the stars in hope now scrambled with the knowledge that the stars had finally answered back. Within 2 hours, every major government on Earth knew the truth. Emergency sessions convened in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, Delhi, Brasilia. Military commanders pulled dusty folders from locked safes. Protocols that had been theoretical for decades suddenly became terrifyingly practical. The Zorkathi fleet continued its steady approach, confident and unstoppable. They had done this 47 times before. They knew how primitives reacted to superior force. Fear, panic, chaos, surrender. They expected nothing different from Earth. They had no idea how wrong they were. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council began at 3 a.m, New York time. Representatives filed into the chamber with faces pale and drawn. Sleep-deprived aides carried tablets showing the same terrible data from dozens of different monitoring stations. The visitors were real. The threat was real. And they were getting closer with every passing hour. Secretary General Martinez stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "At 0400 hours UTC, we received a transmission from the approaching fleet. It has been translated and verified. I will play it now." The voice that filled the chamber was mechanical, filtered through translation software, but the message was crystal clear. "Primitive species of Sol 3. You are hereby claimed as property of the Zorkathi Empire. You will surrender all governmental authority, provide 70% of your planetary water resources, and accept classification as vassal servants. You have 72 hours to comply. Resistance will result in complete sterilization of your planet. This is your only warning," the chamber erupted. Ambassadors shouted in a dozen languages. Some demanded immediate military response. Others called for attempts at negotiation. A few simply sat in stunned silence, faces blank with shock. Martinez slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We must maintain order!" But order was exactly what Earth appeared to be losing. Within hours, the transmission had leaked to the media. News networks broadcast the alien message in an endless loop. Cities descended into chaos as people fled population centers, clogged highways, emptied stores. Stock markets crashed worldwide. Religious leaders offered prayers while scientists offered calculations, none of them optimistic. The consensus was clear and terrible. Humanity had no defense against a spacefaring empire with 300 warships. In Moscow, the Kremlin was surrounded by protesters demanding the government do something, anything. In Beijing, similar crowds gathered in Tiananmen Square. London, Paris, Tokyo, Mumbai, São Paulo, every major city saw the same pattern. Panic spreading like wildfire. Governments scrambling for answers they didn't have. Or so it appeared. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, a very different meeting was taking place. The room had no windows, no natural light, and no connection to any civilian communication network. 50 people sat around a table that could have hosted a corporate board meeting, except these people weren't discussing quarterly earnings. They were discussing survival. General James Morrison stood at the head of the table, his weathered face showing no emotion as he studied the faces around him. Chinese generals sat next to Russian commanders. European Union defense ministers shared data tablets with American Joint Chiefs. Rivalries that had defined geopolitics for decades meant nothing in this room. They never had. Status report, Morrison said simply. A woman in a Chinese military uniform stood. General Yao Lin, though her name appeared on no official roster. The Tiangong network is at full operational capacity. All orbital platforms are armed and tracking the approaching fleet. Estimated time to weapons range is 48 hours. A Russian officer went next. Chernobog system is online. All ground-based installations are synchronized with the orbital grid. We have full targeting solutions. One by one, they reported. The European Union's Odin Protocol, India's Kali Initiative, the African Union's Shaka Defense Network, South America's Pachamama Shield. Every major power and many smaller ones all reporting the same thing. Systems that shouldn't exist were operational and ready. Morrison nodded slowly, his face still showing no emotion. Then we proceed as planned. What's the status of the public misdirection? Proceeding perfectly, replied an American intelligence officer. All visible military movements are conventional forces. We've staged aircraft scrambles, missile repositioning. Exactly what a primitive species would do. Their sensors are reading exactly what we want them to read. And our actual assets? Invisible to their scans. The stealth field generators are working as designed. To their sensors, our orbital platforms look like communications satellites. The lunar installations read as mining equipment. Mars appears to be nothing but scientific outposts. The officer allowed himself a thin smile. They see what we want them to see. Morrison finally showed emotion, a grim satisfaction settling over his features. Gentlemen, ladies, we've been preparing for this day for 43 years. Since Roswell, we've known we weren't alone. Since the second crash in '97, we've known that not everyone out there would be friendly. Every secret project, every black budget program, every resource we've diverted from public view. It all comes down to the next 48 hours. He activated a display on the wall. It showed Earth from space, but overlaid with systems that no civilian knew existed. Orbital weapon platforms numbered in the thousands. Lunar facilities that could crack a moon. Martian installations that made the planet itself into a fortress. Asteroid belt mining operations that served a very different purpose than resource extraction. And everywhere, connecting it all, a quantum communication network that operated outside normal space-time. The Zorkathi think they're facing a divided primitive species, Morrison continued. They think our nuclear weapons are impressive. They think our chemical rockets represent the peak of our achievement. His voice hardened. They have no idea that while their empire spent 3 centuries conquering easy targets, we spent those same centuries fighting each other. We've perfected warfare across every domain. We've built weapons designed to defeat enemies just as creative and vicious as ourselves. A French admiral spoke up. What if they have weapons we haven't anticipated? Then we adapt, Morrison replied. That's what humans do. That's what makes us different from empires that haven't faced real resistance in living memory. We innovate. We improvise. We survive. He looked around the table at these representatives from nations that officially distrusted each other, competing with each other, sometimes hated each other. But here in this room they were simply human, unified by the only threat that mattered. The clock is ticking, Morrison said. 48 hours until they're in weapons range. The world above us thinks we're helpless. Let them think it. Let the Zorkathi think it. When they cross the threshold, when they move to attack, we show them what humanity has really built. The meeting continued through the night, coordinating systems across the globe and beyond. Outside, the world continued its apparent descent into chaos. News footage showed people praying, crying, saying goodbye to loved ones. Governments issued statements that ranged from defiant to resigned. It all looked exactly like a species facing inevitable doom. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, crossing the orbit of Jupiter, Grand Admiral Thexnor watched the same footage with satisfaction. His analysts provided constant updates on Earth's military movements. Primitive aircraft grouping into defensive formations, surface-to-air missiles being deployed, crude nuclear weapons being readied, though they'd never reach orbit before his fleet could intercept them. They're panicking, Kexil observed, watching a news feed showing people flooding out of New York City. This may be easier than projected. Thexnor nodded. They always panic. Fear is the universal constant. 3 more hours and we'll be in optimal strike position. We'll begin with a demonstration. Eliminate one of their cities from orbit. That usually speeds up the surrender process. He zoomed the display to show a tactical map of Earth, selecting targets, calculating firing solutions. Everything proceeding exactly as it had 47 times before. A perfect practiced routine of conquest. Neither he nor anyone else on the flagship noticed the small anomaly in their sensor data, a momentary gravitational flutter near the Martian orbit that their computers dismissed as cosmic background noise. They didn't see the quantum communications burst that had no electromagnetic signature. They didn't detect the zero-point energy reactors spinning up across the solar system, because those reactors operated on principles their science considered theoretical impossibilities. The Zorkathi were looking at Earth and seeing exactly what they expected to see. A primitive, frightened species with no real hope of resistance. They had 300 ships and 47 conquered systems worth of experience. What they didn't have was any experience facing an opponent who wanted them to feel confident. The Zorkathi fleet crossed the orbit of Mars in perfect formation. 300 warships moving like a school of predatory fish through the dark ocean of space. Grand Admiral Thexnor stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching the blue planet grow larger in his displays. 68 hours had passed since their ultimatum. The humans had not responded with words, only with the continued chaos of a dying civilization. Perfect. All ships report ready status, his tactical officer announced. Weapons systems are locked on primary targets. We await your command, Grand Admiral. Thexnor studied the tactical display with the practiced eye of a warrior who had seen this scenario dozens of times. Earth's primitive defenses were clustered around population centers, aircraft, missiles, the crude weapons of a species that had never fought beyond its own atmosphere. He almost felt pity for them. Almost. Open a channel, he commanded. Let me speak to them one final time. The communications officer worked his console, sending out a broad-spectrum signal that would reach every receiver on the planet below. Thexnor composed his features into what he hoped was a merciful expression. Humans of Earth, your time has expired. You have chosen silence over surrender. We will now demonstrate the cost of defiance. After we destroy one of your cities, you will have 1 additional hour to submit. Choose wisely. He cut the transmission and turned to his weapons officer. Target the city they call New York. Prepare firing solution. Grand Admiral. The sensor officer's voice cut through the bridge with an edge of confusion. I'm detecting spatial anomalies, multiple signatures appearing throughout our formation. Thexnor's attention snapped to the sensor display. Strange readings were blossoming like flowers across the screen, appearing between his ships around them, seemingly out of nowhere. Clarify. What am I looking at? Unknown, sir. The signatures don't match any FTL transit we've encountered. They're not moving through space, they're just appearing. Like they were always there and we couldn't see them. A cold finger of doubt touched Thexnor's spine. In 3 centuries, the Zorkathi had never encountered technology they couldn't understand. Visual confirmation, now. The main display shifted to show external camera feeds from multiple ships. What Thexnor saw made his blood run cold. Objects were materializing in the space around his fleet, resolving from invisibility into solid form. They were not ships in any traditional sense. They were geometric nightmares, angular, crystalline structures that hurt to look at, covered in systems that his tactical computer couldn't identify. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, appearing like ghosts becoming solid. Defensive formation. Thexnor roared. All ships, shields to maximum. Identify those. A transmission cut through his commands. A human face appeared on every screen on the bridge. Male, dark-skinned, wearing a uniform that looked almost primitive. But his eyes held no fear, only cold absolute certainty. Attention Zorkathi fleet, you have violated the sovereign territory of the Sol system. You have threatened genocide against the people of Earth. You have 60 seconds to reverse course and begin retreat. This is your only warning. I am General James Morrison, Supreme Commander of the International Space Defense Force. The countdown begins now. Thexnor stared at the human face for 3 heartbeats of stunned silence. Then rage flooded through him. 60 seconds? You give us an ultimatum, open fire. Destroy every human installation you can. Sir, we can't get a weapons lock. The platforms are interfering with our targeting systems. Every time we try to lock on Earth, we get ghost signals from. Then fire on the platforms. Destroy everything in range. The fleet's weapons lit up space with energy beams and kinetic projectiles. Thexnor watched with savage satisfaction as his ships poured devastating firepower into the geometric structures surrounding them. This was Zorkathi might, the power that had broken 47 worlds. The human platforms didn't move, didn't evade. They simply absorbed the incoming fire with shield systems that made the Zorkathi's best defenses look like tissue paper. Energy beams splashed against invisible barriers and dissipated. Kinetic rounds stopped in mid-flight and fell away like rain. And then the countdown reached 0. The human platforms didn't fire conventional weapons. What happened next was something that no Zorkathi sensor could properly track or record. Something that their scientists would spend years failing to understand. Space itself seemed to twist around individual ships. Microscopic gravitational anomalies appeared along hull lines, lasting for nanoseconds but long enough to matter. Where they appeared, shields failed. Hull plating didn't explode. It simply stopped existing. Molecular bonds severed by forces that operated at the quantum level. The warship Crimson Victory, which had participated in the conquest of 12 worlds, came apart in a cloud of expanding atoms. Its shields hadn't failed. They had simply become irrelevant against a weapon that didn't cross the space between attacker and target. The battlecruiser Eternal Wrath fired every weapon it had, pouring out enough firepower to glass a continent. A human platform appeared directly above it, so close that collision seemed inevitable. Instead, something emerged from the platform. Not a projectile, but a packet of information. Quantum entanglement at a scale that shouldn't be possible. The battlecruiser's own atoms were suddenly receiving instructions to become something else. Something very hot. Something that expanded very quickly. The ship detonated from within, not destroyed by external force, but convinced at the molecular level to become an explosion. Throughout the fleet, Zorkathi's ships were simply ceasing to exist. The dreadnought Iron Fist, the carrier Starbreaker, the battleship Vengeful Tide. Ships that had survived dozens of campaigns, vessels that represented decades of construction and carried thousands of warriors, were being unmade in seconds. Thexnor watched his fleet die. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. His tactical officer was screaming numbers that made no sense. 80 ships gone. 90, 100! Sir, we've lost a third of the fleet in less than 5 seconds. All ships, emergency FTL jump. Scatter pattern. Get us out of... FTL drives are being suppressed. We're locked in normal space. Another transmission from the human general, his voice calm as if he were discussing the weather. You're not leaving yet, Admiral. We're not finished with the demonstration. More platforms were appearing, these ones different, smaller, faster, moving like living things through the wreckage of the Zorkathi fleet. Thexnor's computer finally identified them, and he wished it hadn't. Autonomous hunter-killers with adaptive artificial intelligence. Not programmed responses, but actual learning machines that evolved their tactics in real time, studying Zorkathi weapons and defenses and finding weaknesses faster than his crews could adapt. A swarm of them descended on the carrier Sci-Fi. The ship's point defense systems fired frantically, destroying dozens of the small machines. But hundreds more kept coming, and each wave seemed to know exactly where the blind spots were, exactly when to dodge, exactly where to strike. They tore through the carrier's hull like metal insects, burrowing deep, finding critical systems. The carrier's reactor went critical. Another light winked out on Thexnor's display. 200 ships lost. his tactical officer reported, his voice hollow with shock. "Fleet cohesion at critical levels. Admiral, we have to—" The Eternal Dominion shuddered as something struck its shields. Not breached them, just struck them, testing them. A human platform had moved alongside, close enough that Thexnor could see details on its angular surface. Weapon ports were opening, systems were charging. The display showed energy readings that shouldn't be possible from something that size. Thexnor made a decision that no Zorkathi admiral had made in 300 years. All ships. Stop firing. Cease all hostile action. Broadcast on all frequencies. We surrender. We surrender! The human platform held its fire, weapon ports still glowing but not releasing their payload. Across the fleet, the surviving ships went silent, their weapons powering down. Thexnor looked at his display. 300 ships had entered this system. 240 were gone, erased in 4.3 seconds of actual combat. The remaining 60 were damaged, shields failing, crews in shock. General Morrison's face appeared again. This time, Thexnor saw something in the human's expression that was worse than anger. It was disappointment, as if the Zorkathi had failed some test they didn't know they were taking. 60 ships remain, Morrison said. We're going to let some of you leave. Not out of mercy. Out of necessity. Someone needs to deliver a message. Thexnor wanted to scream defiance, to rage against this impossible defeat. But he was a warrior and he recognized when he had lost. More importantly, he recognized that he had lost to an enemy he had catastrophically underestimated. The worst kind of defeat. "We will deliver your message," he said, the words like poison in his throat. Morrison nodded slowly. "Good, then listen carefully, Admiral. Because your Empire's survival depends on you getting this exactly right." The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent except for the quiet beeping of damaged systems and the ragged breathing of shocked crew members. Grand Admiral Thexnor stood before the display showing General Morrison's face, trying to maintain some dignity, even as his entire understanding of the universe crumbled around him. Morrison gestured and the display split. One half continued showing his face. The other half began showing something else. Data streams, historical footage, technical specifications. It was like watching someone open a door into a room you never knew existed. "Let me show you what you missed, Admiral," Morrison said, his tone almost gentle, like a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a struggling student. "Let me show you what you were actually facing." The display showed Earth from orbit but overlaid with markers that Thexnor's sensors had never detected. Thousands of weapon platforms that had been invisible to Zorkathi scanning technology. The moon wasn't a natural satellite. It was a fortress, its interior hollowed out and converted into the largest military installation in the Sol system. Mars was similar, an entire planet transformed into a defensive position. "Your scouts observed us for 6 years, Morrison continued. They saw our radio telescopes and missed the gravitational wave communication networks operating in dimensions you haven't discovered yet. They saw our chemical rockets and missed the quantum displacement drives we've been testing on the far side of Jupiter. They saw divided nations and missed the unified military command structure we established in 1982. Thexnor's translator struggled with some of the terms. Quantum displacement, dimensional operations, concepts his science considered impossible. You're not a primitive species," he managed to say. "The timeline doesn't make sense. 6 years ago, you were barely into your own solar system." 6 years ago is when your scouts arrived, Morrison agreed. "But our preparation didn't begin 6 years ago. It began much earlier." The display changed, showing grainy footage of a desert landscape, a crashed vehicle of some kind, clearly not human in origin. The date stamp read 1947. 78 years ago, we received our first visitor. A scout ship from a species we later learned were refugees, running from something they wouldn't discuss. They died in the crash, but their technology survived. It took us decades to understand even the basic principles, but we learned something important. We weren't alone in the universe, and space wasn't empty. More footage flowed across the display. Secret facilities, underground laboratories, test flights of vehicles that looked nothing like the rockets the Zorkathi scouts had observed. Morrison's narration continued, calm and methodical. "We had a choice to make. We could continue fighting each other over resources and territory on one planet, or we could prepare for the day when someone came from outside. Someone who might not be friendly. It wasn't an easy choice. Nations that had fought wars for centuries had to learn to work together in secret. Resources had to be diverted from public view. We had to develop weapons without anyone knowing we were doing it. The display showed a montage of human history, wars, terrible, destructive conflicts spanning millennia, weapons evolving from stone to steel to explosives to nuclear fire, each conflict more devastating than the last, each one teaching humanity new ways to kill. You've conquered 47 systems in 300 years, Morrison said. Impressive. But here's what you don't understand about humans, Admiral. We've been conquering each other for 10,000 years. We've fought wars across every domain, land, sea, air, and eventually space. We've built weapons specifically designed to defeat enemies who are just as creative, just as desperate, and just as vicious as we are. Thexnor watched footage of human conflicts, massive armies clashing, cities burning, weapons that horrified him in their simple brutality. These weren't the tools of a primitive species. They were the refinements of a species that had perfected the art of warfare through constant, brutal practice. Your empire expanded by defeating species that had never faced real resistance, Morrison continued. You developed tactics that worked against weak opponents and never needed to improve them. You built weapons that were good enough and never needed to make them better. You grew confident, comfortable. The display showed Zorkathi battles from their own records, footage the humans should never have been able to access. Thexnor's shock deepened. They had hacked Zorkathi systems. They had been inside his fleet's computers, watching, studying. We, on the other hand, have never had the luxury of weak opponents. Every major war pushed us to innovate or die. Every conflict was against enemies who learned and adapted. We didn't just develop weapons, Admiral. We developed the ability to outthink, outplan, and out-innovate anyone who threatened us. The display showed the human platforms again, those geometric nightmares that had torn through his fleet like it was made of paper. Morrison pointed to them with something that might have been pride. Gravitational shear weapons, quantum entanglement warheads, adaptive AI hunter-killers, dimensional suppression fields. We didn't copy these from anyone. We invented them by asking a simple question. How do you kill someone who has shields that stop conventional weapons? Someone who uses tactics that worked for 3 centuries? You figure out what they can't defend against and you build weapons they've never imagined. Thexnor found his voice, though it came out weaker than he would have liked. Why reveal this? Why tell me any of this? Morrison's expression hardened. Because you need to deliver a message to your emperor, and to any other species watching, and to anyone else who might be considering what you attempted today. The display zoomed out, showing the Sol system in tactical overview. Every defensive position, every weapon platform, every military installation that humanity had built over decades of secret preparation. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It represented a level of coordinated effort that the Zorkathi, despite their empire, had never achieved. Here's the message, Admiral. Earth is not helpless. Earth is not primitive. Earth is not available for conquest. We've been waiting for someone like you. We've been ready. And now you're going to go home and tell your emperor exactly what happens when you threaten humanity. Morrison leaned forward, his eyes locked on Thexnor's. We've already mapped your empire. We know where your shipyards are. We know where your colony worlds are located. We know where your emperor sleeps at night. We've had ships in your territory for 3 years, watching you the same way you watched us. The difference is you never saw ours. It was impossible. The Zorkathi home system had defensive sensors that could detect a ship the size of a fighter from 3 light years away. You're lying, Thexnor said, but his voice held no conviction. Morrison smiled without humor and gestured. The display showed footage from what was clearly the Zorkathi capital. Street scenes, government buildings, the Imperial Palace itself. Timestamps showed the footage was recent. Some of it was from yesterday. We're not lying, Admiral. We're not bluffing. We're teaching. This is what happens when you underestimate your opponent. This is what happens when you let 3 centuries of easy victories make you arrogant. This is what happens when you threaten a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to fight. Thexnor felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Real, genuine fear. Not fear of death in battle, that was honorable. Fear of having made a mistake so catastrophic that it might doom his entire species. What do you want from us? He asked. Nothing, Morrison replied. We don't want your territory. We don't want your resources. We don't want to conquer you. We just want you to leave us alone. And we want everyone else who might be watching to understand that Seoul is now a defended system. The next fleet that approaches with hostile intent won't get a warning. It won't get a chance to surrender. It will be detected and destroyed before it even enters the Oort cloud. Morrison stood, and his image grew larger on the display. 30 of your ships will be permitted to jump to FTL and return to your empire. The other 30 will remain here, held in place by our gravitational anchors, not destroyed. Kept alive as further demonstration of our capabilities. In 1 month, we'll release them. Consider them hostages to your good behavior. And if we return with a larger fleet? Thexnor asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy the last of his hope. Then we'll introduce you to weapons we didn't use today, Morrison said simply. What you saw was defensive capability, Admiral. Things we built to protect our home. If you make us go on offense, if you make us come to your territory instead of defending our own, you'll learn what happens when humans stop trying to minimize casualties and start trying to end threats permanently. I suggest you don't find out what that looks like. The transmission ended. Thexnor stood in the silence of his ruined bridge, surrounded by the wreckage of the most powerful fleet the Zorkathi Empire had ever assembled. A fleet that had been reduced to 60 damaged ships by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. He looked at the surviving members of his crew, young warriors who had expected an easy victory and instead witnessed the impossible, veterans who had served in dozens of campaigns and never seen anything like this, all of them looking to him for orders, for leadership. 3 months had passed since the fleet returned home. Grand Admiral Thexnor stood in the throne room of the Imperial Palace, a place he had stood many times before to report victories. Today was different. Today, he stood as the bearer of the Empire's first defeat in 300 years, and the weight of that failure sat on his shoulders like gravity from a dying star. The Emperor sat on his throne, ancient and massive, his scales showing the gold patterns that marked pure royal bloodline. Around the throne room, the High Council waited in silence. Every important figure in the Zorkathi Empire was present. They all knew what had happened. They had all seen the recordings. But hearing it from Thexnor's own mouth made it real in a way that reports and footage could not. "Speak," the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Thexnor squared his shoulders and began his report. He spoke for an hour, detailing every aspect of the failed invasion. The human weapons that operated on principles Zorkathi science could barely understand. The unified defense grid that had been hidden in plain sight. The speed and precision of the counterattack that had erased 240 ships in seconds. The technological superiority that should not have existed in a species that appeared primitive. When he finished, silence hung over the throne room like smoke after a fire. Finally, one of the council members spoke, a war minister who had overseen dozens of successful campaigns. "This is impossible. A species cannot advance that quickly. Our scouts observed them thoroughly. Their technology level was confirmed." "Our scouts observed what the humans wanted them to observe," Thexnor replied. "We measured their visible technology and assumed it represented their full capability. We were wrong. Catastrophically wrong." Another council member stood, her voice sharp with accusation. "You commanded the largest fleet ever assembled. You had every advantage. How could you lose to primitives?" "They were never primitive," Thexnor said, and now anger crept into his voice. "That was our mistake. We assumed that visible technology indicated overall capability. We assumed that divided political systems meant divided military capacity. We assumed that lack of faster-than-light travel meant inferiority. Every assumption was wrong." He activated a holographic display showing footage from the battle. The council watched in growing horror as human weapons unmade Zorkathi ships with casual efficiency. They watched adaptive AI systems learn and evolve faster than military computers could calculate responses. They watched weapons that operated outside normal spacetime, making traditional defenses meaningless. "The humans have been preparing for first contact for nearly 80 years, Thexnor continued. "While we grew comfortable with easy conquests, they were innovating. While we used the same tactics for 3 centuries, they were developing new ones. They are not primitive, counselors. They are dangerous in ways we never imagined." The Emperor raised one massive hand, silencing the murmuring that had started among the council. "The 30 ships you left behind. What is their status?" "Released 2 weeks ago, as the humans promised." They returned with a formal message. Thexnor gestured, and another hologram appeared. General Morrison's face recorded but no less intimidating for it. The Council listened to Earth's terms. The Sol system was sovereign territory. Military approaches would be considered acts of war. Trade and diplomatic contact were possible, under human terms and conditions. They dictate terms to us? A council member sputtered. To the Zorkathi Empire? They demonstrated the capability to destroy our fleet and chose not to. Thexnor replied flatly. They demonstrated the capability to reach our home world undetected and chose not to attack. They are not dictating from a position of bluster, Counselor. They are dictating from a position of demonstrated superiority. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying the holographic display. Finally he spoke. Our subject species. What is their status? The intelligence minister stood, his report clearly painful to deliver. The news of our defeat has spread throughout the Empire. The Kelvan have declared independence. The Morgath colonies have ceased tribute shipments. The Yenth are in open rebellion. We calculate that within 6 months 15 systems will attempt to break away from Imperial control. The throne room erupted in angry shouts. 3 centuries of expansion, unraveling because of one defeat. The Emperor let them shout for a moment, then silenced them with a gesture. And the humans? Have they made contact with our former subjects? No, Majesty. Their ships have been observed at our borders, but they have made no aggressive moves. They appear to be watching, observing, exactly as we once observed them. The Emperor leaned back on his throne, and something like a bitter smile crossed his features. They learned from us. How unfortunate that the lesson worked both ways. He looked at Thexnor. Admiral, your honest assessment. If we gathered every ship in the Empire and returned to Earth, what would be the outcome? Thexnor met his Emperor's eyes without flinching. Total defeat, Majesty. The weapons they used against us were defensive systems. General Morrison made it clear they have offensive capabilities they did not deploy. If we force them to take aggressive action, if we make them come to us rather than defending their own territory, the Empire will fall. Not gradually, quickly. The Emperor nodded slowly. Then we have one choice. We sue for peace. We open diplomatic channels. We treat with them as equals. The words clearly tasted like poison in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway, because the alternative is extinction. Far across the galaxy in countless systems, other civilizations were reaching similar conclusions. The footage from the battle at Earth had spread through black markets and intelligence networks. Advanced species that had been considering expansion into the Sol region suddenly reconsidered. Younger civilizations looked at humanity with new respect and fear. The political landscape of an entire galactic sector had shifted overnight. On Earth, in the public spaces where normal people lived and worked, life was slowly returning to something like normal. The revelation of the secret space military had caused uproar, investigations, and endless debates. Politicians navigated the scandal carefully. Yes, they had diverted resources. Yes, they had kept secrets. But those secrets had saved humanity from enslavement. The public was angry but alive, and gradually that seemed like a reasonable trade. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her office at the Joint Deep Space Monitoring Facility, looking at displays that were now much more sophisticated than the ones she had used 3 months ago. There was no need to hide the advanced equipment anymore. Earth's technology was public knowledge now, at least the basic facts of it. They had weapons. They had ships. They had capabilities that matched or exceeded most spacefaring civilizations. She watched the new monitoring stations come online. These ones humanity didn't bother hiding. Massive installations at the Lagrange points. Orbital platforms that openly bristled with weapon systems. The Sol system's defense grid, once secret, now stood as an open warning to anyone watching. Her console chimed. Multiple contacts, approaching from the direction of the Zorkathi Empire. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed as the identification codes came through. Diplomatic vessels broadcasting peaceful intentions, requesting permission to approach Earth. General Morrison stood in the command center of what was now called the International Space Defense Force headquarters, no longer buried under a mountain but standing openly in Geneva. The facility was a symbol of Earth's new position in the galaxy. Transparent walls showed the sky above, and holographic displays showed the space beyond. Nothing hidden. Nothing apologetic. He watched the diplomatic vessels approach and allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy was learning to knock before entering. That was progress. He opened a communication channel, his face appearing on screens across the facility.
This is General Morrison to all stations.
We have incoming diplomatic contact. Prepare for standard greeting protocols. Maintain defensive readiness, but do not show aggression. Let's show our visitors that humans can be gracious hosts, as long as guests remember their manners. Outside Earth's atmosphere, construction continued on humanity's first interstellar shipyard. The massive structure orbited Venus, growing larger every day. Automated systems assembled components while human engineers supervised. The ships being built there weren't for invasion or conquest. They were for exploration, for trade, for defense of human interest in a galaxy that was suddenly much more crowded. But they were also a message. A visible, undeniable statement that Earth wasn't just defending anymore. The species that had nearly been enslaved was building a fleet. Not to match the great empires, but to exceed them. Not to conquer others, but to ensure no one could conquer them. In the final analysis, humanity had learned the most important lesson from their brush with extinction. The galaxy respected strength. Not aggression, but capability. The ability to defend what was yours. The willingness to innovate, adapt, and survive no matter what came through the dark. Earth still had problems. Nations still competed. Resources were still scarce in places. But now those problems had context. They were human problems to be solved by humans, without interference from empires that thought water and strategic position gave them ownership rights.